So we'll get started. My name is Atif Kader, and this is Conversations at Michael Graves. We are recording from the iconic home of architect Michael Graves in Princeton, New Jersey, right next to the office of the world-renowned design firm that bears his name. In this series, we will hear the stories of American buildings from the perspective of the architects and developers who are constructing them. They will talk about the process and the product on a deeply personal level, highlighting the teamwork, integrity, ingenuity, empathy, and commitment that is necessary to produce these works of art gracing the skylines of our cities and towns. Today, our guest is Samer Hanini. Samer is the founder and managing partner of the Hanini Group, a development company with an affiliated architecture firm, Brick Design, and construction management firm, Hanini Construction. We will be talking about the People's Bank building, his recently completed 120,000 square foot mixed-use building in downtown Passaic, New Jersey. This historic landmark was originally built in 1931 and after standing empty for nearly 30 years was completely renovated to include both retail and office. Samer and his team served as developer, designer, as well as construction manager. Samer, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to turn the clock back to the 1990s when you were a recent graduate of NJIT, the New Jersey Institute of Technology. You and your brother Thafer decided to purchase a building shell by auction in Newark. By all estimates, you both were crazy. Could you talk more about that very first project as a developer and why you decided to make that leap?
I still remember it was roughly 2004. So I was in NJIT, was working out at the gym, and a buddy of mine, a classmate, Paul Giammona, was also working out, and me and him were always trying to figure out a business model of sorts, whatever. So I said, Paul, there's an auction coming up in the city of Newark. They got a bunch of buildings. Let's try to bid on them. He's like, sure, let's give it a try. So we looked at the list of buildings. We toured all of them. We only found one that we really liked. Unfortunately, we missed the window to view the properties. So we could only bid on them just from the exterior, which was a little scary when it's your first development. But there's a lot of stupidity involved in development, just so you guys know. So we ended up we figured, okay, what would the property go for?
Sure.
We said it's probably going to not go past $400,000. So at that point, we were all just working our 9-to-5 jobs, and we were just right out of school. So we scraped together between our family, his family, and a lot of credit cards. We scraped together the 10% deposit that we needed for the bid. So we had that check ready. We bid on it, and it ended up selling for $315,000, which was a little more than if there was just one lady that didn't bid, we would have gotten it probably close to $250,000. Anyway, we ended up buying it for $400,000, and $315,000. And then we started the process of, first of all, actually, the funny part is when we entered the building, there was an actual tree in the middle of the building. Like physically, a tree was growing up 3 stories in the middle of the building.
And not a decorative element part of the landscape?
Nothing. This was definitely due to neglect. And the first floor was structurally supported by the tree and the carpet. And it goes to show you that plastic will definitely outlive nature.
Wow.
The nylon in the carpet was actually holding up the first floor. Okay. It was great. It was very scary. We ended up, we didn't even have the keys. We cut the lock. We entered the property. And then we just started demolition. On the inside, we literally demoed everything just from brick to brick, and even the roof was off. So we just literally had to shell.
And when you say we, that's you, your brother, a team of workers. What was this like?
No. It was me, my brother, my younger brother, my dad, Paul, his brother, his dad, and any of my friends that I could find. It was a challenging project. So over a period of 2 years, after work, weekends, and whatever, we were in there. We physically did all of the work in the property. Sure. Again, we came from fairly humble backgrounds, so it wasn't like we didn't have the check just to write. We had to put in a lot of sweat equity. We couldn't hire contractors. We ended up doing a lot of the work ourselves. We were fortunate to get a bank to finance a portion of it, but the rest we had to kind of scrape up together. So a lot of friends and family, and begging and whatever to get the funds needed to build the property.
How did that hands-on experience in that first project influence the subsequent projects you decided to pursue after that?
The good and the bad of this project, even though it took us 2 years and it took a lot of work, we were able to go to our future investors and say, listen, this is what we started with, this is what we have. Yeah. It was a real life model of our ability to deliver. And a lot of investors and a lot of people with like high net worth want to see the skill set, want to see the passion in delivering, because they know development is such a difficult business. And for you to spend 2 years and putting all that time and effort and everybody in your family putting it in, yeah. Investors look at that as a huge up for you as an investment. So it did help me in our next round in our next project, we actually brought our investor to the building. We had our office on the top floor at that point, and we brought her to the building and we said, here's what we did with the limited resources, and here's the delivery, here's what we were able to get out of nothing. Sure. And she was very impressed, and then that's when we started on our next project.
So from that first project through to the People's Bank building that we'll talk about today and beyond, your specialty that you've carved out is historic redevelopment projects. Right. So you mentioned already that development's a pretty hairy process as it is. What would you say are some of the skills that are necessary to succeed in that particular subset of redevelopment as opposed to new construction?
So, historical restoration for us just came out of just pure necessity. I mean, as much of us, as many of us know, Newark has struggled, has gone through some difficult times. And when we started developing, not many large projects were happening. It was still challenging. And they have had awesome building stock. So the buildings that you walk around, if you walk around downtown Newark, you just look up and you see all the history, you see all the beautiful details. That's
particularly like Broad Street and Market.
Yeah, Market and Broad Street. Some of the most gorgeous buildings in this area are built in downtown Newark. And I think, we started in Newark. We were there, much of it by luck, a little skill involved. Yeah. But we were lucky. I mean, and we hit Newark, and we hit it at the right time, and we were forced into the restorations because the market in Newark didn't justify new construction. So we were able to find these buildings that had awesome bones and a lot of history, and learn how to make a business model out of it. Okay. Now, the beauty of historical restoration, and if you do it right, you're able to qualify for historical tax credits. So. And our construction costs were those of New York construction costs or Jersey City construction costs. But our income was probably a third of it. So how do you justify building new or a rehab in Newark when the rents don't justify it?
Got it.
So the only way it works is with incentives or programs like the historical tax credits. So we were kind of forced into this business, and we learned a lot about applying for tax credits. I mean, we've done a ton of different tax credit programs. Like for the Hotel Indigo, I want to say there was probably 10 different capital sources. So you have historical tax credits, new market tax credits, tax abatement, UEZ loans, ERG program from New Jersey EDA, city subsidies, city grants, you name it, we got it to get this project going. Because again, you're trying to compete with New York with their pricing, and you want to build that product in Newark. That was good and bad. It was good because we came out of nothing and we were able to produce this stuff. It was bad because you needed to make a business model.
Sure.
Right? So we kind of just, with all that help and obviously the support from the city.
Sure.
The support from the governor's office, all of the entities, the government officials that were in the area really wanted projects like this to succeed. So we had a lot of help and a lot of programs that they were able to give us.
So it sounds like the secret sauce that you've been able to develop is technical expertise in terms of the architecture and engineering of buildings like this, the ability to creatively assemble capital, and the ability to have the city and local government be supportive of what you're looking to do. It's those three things together.
Right, and a lot of luck.
And a lot of luck as well. I'm sure that's part of the equation too. So in the context of the People's Bank building, so it's a 12-story building that was built during the depths of the Great Depression, and in subsequent years it saw, in a similar way to Passaic, its rise and fall as an industrial city. This is particularly one that's unique because it's so tall in comparison to the buildings around it that when we went to visit recently you can see it from miles away.
Right.
What were your first impressions of that building when you went to visit?
So my first impression is it reminded me of the Hotel Indigo.
Okay.
Similar height.
Your project in Newark,
in
New
downtown
Jersey.
Newark. Yeah, that's a Cass Gilbert building, a very prominent cornice. It's a gorgeous building, but it had similar structure. It was tall and slender. Some of the challenging things with historical buildings like this is when you build them tall and slender, there's not much real estate that you could rent, right? Between the elevator shafts, between the staircases, you're left with a very limited amount of square footage to make a business model out of.
Okay.
So when we walked in, we had that in mind. So we wanted to make sure that you're creating all this infrastructure. What's the net rentable area that you have? And so that on a structural level, that's what I saw. On a physical, like actually walking through the building, it had a bunch of challenges. So first of all, the whole interior was demoed. Unfortunately, the historical detail that we cherish and we love, and from our experience in Newark, that's what we love most about these buildings. All these little details, all these bronze finishes and cool stair treads and all this stuff, they weren't there. It was totally gut on the inside.
What had remained?
The exterior. I mean, we discovered a few mosaic floors on the entry which we restored. We discovered obviously the prominent detail in the building is this 2-story atrium.
Sure.
It's a 25-foot interior volume of space on the second floor. That's very, very prominent on the street. So that was there as a volume, and just the exterior details. I mean, the brickwork, the limestone details on the outside, the coins of the craftsmen, the pictures on the outside, they were there.
Those are the terracotta medallions that show different trades.
Different trades from the area. So I learned obviously afterwards of what they were for. They represented all the people that worked in the area.
Okay.
Passaic was big in industry, millwork, and steel work and trades like that. So they represented those with those medallions. And the prominence of the building was probably the biggest historical detail. Like you could drive down the adjacent highways and you could see this building from all around. It's funny because when we first started it wasn't prominent at all. You just saw the building. And when we started construction, we demoed everything. We put construction lights up. And I recall the first day driving down Route 21, and I looked to the left, and I saw this tower that was lit. And it was a new detail in my drive because it wasn't lit for 20 or 30 years.
So it was essentially abandoned for decades before you came.
Yeah, and it's funny because that's how I reacted to it. And every city official that I talked to, the first 20 seconds of talking about the building, they say, you know something? I finally see a lit tower in Passaic, and it makes me proud. So just those things is part of the historical details of the building. It was the tallest building and is still the tallest building from all the surrounding cities.
Okay. And you had mentioned that similar to that first building where there was a tree growing inside, and that was part of one of the things you needed to address. With this building having been empty for 2 decades, could you talk about some of the damage or some of the structural and architectural issues that you needed to address because of the abandonment?
Sure. So nature always plays a role in our buildings for
Rain,
some reason.
Water,
So
wind.
you go down to the basement and there was 8 feet of water. Literally, 10,000 square feet of 8 feet of water.
So you had a swimming pool. That's basically the idea.
Under the building was an old stream. They built on top of the stream. So they always accommodated it somehow, but because we lost power and it wasn't maintained, the pumps obviously didn't work, and the only thing you get is a lot of water. So the biggest challenge was to empty out the water long enough for PSE&G to come into the basement and give us permanent power. Okay. So it was a constant, like we had generators there for months until we were able to put permanent power, put a permanent sump pump system, a redundant one to that, and a redundant one to that. So just in case, God forbid something happens.
If there were another large rain or...
Yeah, you never know. And it's, you go to the basement now and there's a constant stream of water coming into the building. So you have a 4-inch pipe that we put a underground pump system, and 4 inches of water constantly flows into the basement. So we have this massive sump pump in the basement that pumps the water out. Yeah. So that was the biggest like
serious architectural engineering issue.
detail. The other thing is, what do we do with the volume space on the second floor?
Sure.
So banks when they were built at that time, that grand lobby, that grand bank space was important to show the stature of the space, sure. of the teller space.
This idea of signaling.
Yeah, just to show wealth, to show dominance. And what do you do that in present day, in a city that has its own issues? What do you do with such a grand space? Sure. You can only do a couple of things with it. You either do like a venue space, or you do very high retail. But how do you heat it? How do you circulate around it? How do you make use of the windows? You don't want to, if you lowered the ceiling, you would affect the windows. Sure. Again, the most prominent detail of this building is this atrium space. You had to respect it somehow. So, and make a business model out of it. As we're doing these projects, we're always doing the numbers. We like going to these cities, we like doing these projects, but at the end of the day, these projects have sat around for a long time for a reason, because they're hard to work on. They're hard to make a business model. They're hard to pay for. They're hard to build. So when we're doing these projects, we're layering in the business model. Sure. You have to do it. And when we're working with SHPO or the Landmark Commission, the local Landmark Commission, even though the financial portion of the building doesn't concern them, but it's reality, and they've always been awesome working with us. So we'll present them the problem and we'll say, listen, here's our suggestion. Here's what we could do to make this thing viable. Because without making that volume usable, the building really is not going to be presentable to the street. So we had proposed putting a mezzanine space in there.
To basically break up that second floor into two. Yeah, so
the second floor, but we respected the windows, so we set it back a whole bay.
And those windows being one of those incredibly unique, beautiful architectural elements.
Right, and even like the railing was all glass, so we tried to respect the windows as much as possible from the street view. We didn't want it to be too pushy as far as the mezzanine goes. So we set back the mezzanine as far as possible. We ended up signing a Blink Fitness to the second floor. So they enter from a retail space on the first floor, and then they have 2 floors of a gym space. It's a great thing because from the street, you're always seeing the light that comes from the gym. Yep. And people are working out, and it really complements walking down Main Street. You get to see activity, and that activity helps. One of the things that the city wanted was to activate the building to help revitalize all of Main Avenue. One of their biggest issues was this building. I mean, we were talking before about the scaffolding. The scaffolding outside sat for, I think, close to 6 years. So they had a sidewalk shut up for 6 years. This, the plywood up, it was painted horribly, and it just sat there. And it was a challenge for neighbors to have their business kind of flourish. So they were excited to see this building come back to life, and obviously they were awesome. I want to say they were probably one of the best cities to work in. They bent over backwards to make sure that whatever we needed to get done would get done. But the atrium space, that double-story window, was important in giving back to the streetscape. So I'm really proud of the end results of it, because it actually brings a lot of light to the street, and the more light, the more activity helps other retailers on the street. And now they're actually I think they were approved to redo their whole streetscape. So they're going to change all of Main Avenue.
Not just the one around this building,
not just the whole Main Avenue. And this was part of their application I think they got a grant from either state or a federal program to redo the whole Main Street to redo the parking and streetscape and stuff.
So in the context of those first few visits that you made to the building before you signed on to be the developer, you saw these architectural and engineering challenges. You saw the state of the historical details that were in the building. And within the urban context of Passaic, low median income, low high school graduation rates, high crime. What was that thought process that you mentioned in terms of going through and understanding what you can get for the returns from a project like this and all the financing structures that occurred for you in this context, since you've been a developer for about 10 years by the time that you came to this building? Did a lot of that happen just kind of in your head as you were going through it in the first visit, or was there actually a really long, lengthy process before you even decided to pursue the project?
The interesting thing with Passaic, even though they have their own economical challenges with some of the residents that are there, you walk down Main Street and there isn't an empty shop. So, and that says a lot about the community.
It's basically high foot traffic, people are coming through.
Unbelievably high foot traffic. There's no storefronts that are empty. You go there on a Saturday, you don't find a spot. It got to a point where we had to actually just, rent a bunch of spots for our team. Sure. Because we never found a spot. And that says a lot. I mean, yeah. So as concerned as I was about retail, and I'm very concerned about retail just across the board, in every development, retail is now the biggest obstacle. I wasn't concerned. I mean, because, okay, maybe we don't get a national, which is fine. We don't need a national tenant. Having, a local, a mom and pop, and that sort of retailer is sometimes better than that corporate signature from a national brand. Because a lot of these mom and pops, and you go down the street and you see them everywhere. So they're committed there. You don't get a lot of turnover with the retail. So the stores that are opening up are sustainable. And when you see that, the retail wasn't too concerning for me. If I walked down and I saw, 4 rent signs every other street, every other store, I would be concerned. I'm like, all right, let me not underwrite the retail at all. Let me just assume it's going to be vacant. Sure. But in this case, we were comfortable. We were concerned. Our biggest concern, economic, looking at the building, was, the building, is it going to be office? Is it going to be residential?
Did you consider residential seriously?
So our first step with every building is residential. I mean, that's where I want to, the residential is what developers are looking for.
Low vacancy, easily financeable.
It's just easier, less risk. People have to live someplace. So, residential will be a safe bet. And office space and retail has been a challenge. Okay. But what we did know is Passaic wants this building to survive, wants this building to come back to life. And people from the Board of Education were getting squeezed out of their existing office space, so they were looking for another space. So we said, you know what, let's sit down and talk. Let's see if we could accommodate your needs and bring this building back to life. So early on in the discussion, we sat with the Board of Education, we found out what their needs are, and we ended up reaching some good terms, and they ended up taking the top 7 floors of the building, which, for us was great. We had to now deal with the retail, the atrium space, and a couple of other floors, which was still risky, but was very manageable. So we got started with that. Then we went to the city and we talked about, we needed help with the facade. It's a very large building with a lot of exterior facades.
So literally 4 facades. There's no backup.
Yeah, so that's another challenge with the building. It sat on an island on its own. It's on a block, and you had literally 4 sides to deal with. So where's your maintenance entrance? Where is your back of house? Where's all that stuff was a challenge. So they ended up giving us a facade grant to change the windows, which was great. So with the city on that, it was through a UEZ program. So through that and through the cities, we had we talked to them about the tax abatement and structure for a tax abatement. We ended up getting that done. I want to say the entitlements from start to finish was probably 6 months.
Okay. Which
was like, record breaking. I mean, the city of Passaic was awesome. I mean, I can't say more good things about him. I mean, Joe Buga, who runs the UEZ and was our point person there, was one of the best guys to work with. I mean, the person who maintained the building was a relative of his, and he had a room in the basement, so that was his room. So it was great to work with Joe Buga, and and help bring back to life a building that he was part of.
Great. So in the context of talking about the project from the first time that you visited to deciding to be a developer and then getting started with the design strategy, a lot of that story is intertwined with incentives. So in order to get a better understanding of all of these really complicated financing pieces, let's go one by one to get an understanding of each of them individually and how they combine together. So the first one, so get ready for the acronym SOUP, UEZ, so Urban Enterprise Zone you had mentioned. Could you explain what particularly the benefits were of that program and what the requirements were of you to pursue that program?
So the UEZ is a state program. It gave you, for sales, it gave you low sales tax. So like you see the 3% sales tax, that's all UEZ programs. So any of the stores you see,
like in Jersey
tax,
City or Newark.
Jersey City or Elizabeth or Newark, they all had that 3%. So that was part of the UEZ program. It also had 0% sales tax for construction.
Okay.
And services in areas like this. So all of the construction products that we bought didn't have sales tax on them. And it also had a facade program attached to it. Okay. So they would get a pool of money in the city. Every city had its own pool. And they were able to use those UEZ funds to help revitalize the downtowns, the main streets, the areas that have all of the retail jobs. So fortunately, they had some funds in their UEZ program. And this building has, in the past 10, 20 years, it's always been an impediment for them to develop their main street.
Okay.
So they were very eager to help us with the windows. So we ended up applying for a UEZ grant for that. And luckily we were able to get that. And then that was able to get that done fairly quickly.
Okay. Now give us a ballpark of, given these are different streams of benefits, what the overall value of partaking in the UEZ benefits were to a project like this.
Like you're saying dollar
yeah, dollar amount.
I want to say on the windows, I think we had like $500,000. Okay. The windows alone were probably double that.
There's so many windows.
Yeah, so it's not a huge portion of the capital stack, sure. But honestly, we learned from all of our projects in Newark, any little bit counts.
Sure.
We've even applied for grants for like PSE&G for energy upgrades and things like that. Those are even smaller dollar amounts. Sometimes it's not worth the brain damage, but again, in these projects, wherever you could find it, you have to go for it because these projects are hard to finance. So you have to take off as much as you can off of the equity needs. I mean, one thing that you do learn doing these developments in downtowns, you learn how to read a lot and to
read quickly
and know where to invest your time with these programs. There's tons of programs.
Sure.
The question is, does it make sense for this particular project? And sometimes the programs don't mix. So you can't mix two state programs sometimes. You can't mix two city programs. Okay. You can mix federal, state, and city, but you have to kind of pick and choose how you put them together.
And that's why incentives can be incredibly challenging.
Yeah, yeah.
So the other type of incentive that you pursued was tax credits. Sorry, let me say that again. So the building is also eligible for tax credits, and there's two different types of tax credits that you pursued on this project. So there's HTCs, historic tax credits, like you had mentioned, as well as new market tax credits. Could you explain what both of them are and what their benefits are?
So historical tax credits is a federal program. They give you 20% of the development cost as a tax credit to the project.
Okay.
So what does that mean? First of all, the building has to be a qualified landmark or a contributing building in a historical district. In Newark, we have 5 historical districts, and there's a ton of contributing buildings. So that's kind of easier to do. In Passaic, there's no historical district. The buildings there, I think there's probably two, I probably got this wrong, 2 or 3 historical buildings. This building wasn't done. So before we even applied for historical tax credits, we had to make sure the building qualifies to receive the historical tax credit. So this was one additional step. Typically, applying for historical tax credits is a three-part process. Part 1 is confirming that the building is a historical building. Part 2 is is the proposal on what you plan to do with the building while maintaining the historical details.
Okay.
And part 3 is when they come and they inspect everything that was built and it was according to the plans. So typically, if you're in a historical district, part 1 is done. You have nothing to worry about.
Sure.
With this particular building, we actually have to apply part 1 and justify why this building is historic and it's important for the area. Now, one of the biggest problems is that the building was demoed on the inside. There was no more historical details. So we had to justify that the exterior was enough importance to the area to justify that. So that was a little bit of a challenge. And the mezzanine on the second floor was also a challenge. So those were 2 challenges. Luckily, NPS, Newark Parks, National Park Services, and SHPO, the State Historical Preservation Organization, both saw what we were trying to do, and they finally allowed us to do this project as a historical tax credit project. Okay. So after receiving the approval, you get 20% of the development cost as a historical tax credit. Now, the tax credit is a federal tax credit. We end up taking these tax credit and selling it to a federal program. A federal business that could utilize the tax credits.
That was U.S. Bancorp.
U.S. Bank was in this particular one was U.S. Bank, and they pay us a portion. So for every $1, they'll give you whatever 75 cents, 80 cents, 85 cents, based on what the value is of that time. Sure. So you take those funds and then you use those to build the building.
Because they'll essentially give you money to build a building up front.
And they give it to you throughout the construction project. So they'll give you a little bit in the beginning, a little bit in the middle, and a little bit at the end when you're completed.
And what was a rough estimate of the benefits from the HTC perspective that the project got?
So on this project, it was roughly $2.5 million in historical tax credits.
And new market tax credits, was that the most valuable incentive that the building was able to partake in?
It was almost the same. I mean, they were both the challenging part with the historical tax credits is, yes, they give you the tax credits, but the hard part is you actually have to build it to historical levels. So you have to install accurate windows that portray the historical details of the building. You have to clean and repoint the exterior again to NPS's standards. You have to, the circulation has to be done right. You can't build any exteriors, any like new additions to the exterior. Signage is important. So even though they give you those tax credits, it does cost you more to qualify for that.
Got it.
But you know what? I mean, for us, we've been big fans of historical buildings, and we were going to do that work anyway. So we might as well get the tax credit to help us build these projects.
And then similarly for new market tax credits, what were the eligibility requirements that were necessary for this building, and was the return structured in a similar way to HDC's?
So new market tax credits is a little bit of a different program. It's also a federal program. Sure. You have to team up with a community developer. So a community developer that gets a new market allocation from the federal government. So they have an allocation and they get to use it on projects in the community. So with new market tax credits, you're doing 2 things. You're job creating and helping the community. So you have to build that story for them to give you the tax credits. In this particular case, we were helping the Board of Education find a new home that's centralized to their area and create new jobs. So they were able to bring on new people. We will bring on a retail on the first floor and the gym on the second floor. So all that job creation is part of the new market tax credits program.
And then I believe that was New Jersey Community Capital that was involved in that perspective.
JCC. They're also another great partner. We've worked with them on a couple of other projects in Newark. Okay. The good thing is we were able to take a lot of what we learned. I mean, I call this, it's been a 10-year MBA program for me, figuring out how to do real estate development.
Got it.
So we took everything we learned in Newark.
Probably much more valuable than an actual MBA.
Yeah, it would have been cheaper to go to a...
Maybe, yeah.
But anyway.
That's a whole other story.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of education and development is that's, like you said, it's the whole other story. We were able to take all of our learned mistakes from Newark and some of the other projects we worked on and apply them to this project. And, you know, fortunately enough, with the help of the city, we were able to capitalize on that.
So I think incentives, we can agree, are an incredibly important part of kickstarting development in areas across New Jersey and across the country. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. For example, Amazon and its attempt for getting financing for its headquarters was able to attract incredibly large sums of money for the development of a new campus. Right. Where do you think, either specifically in that example or more broadly from your experience, where do you think the line is drawn between incentives that are a necessity versus incentives that can work their way towards a windfall for a developer?
So, I mean, you have to look at the basis of an incentive. What is an incentive? It's to incentivize you as a developer or a business or whatever to come to a particular location.
Be it Passaic or elsewhere.
Whatever. I mean, the cities are all competing. The state is all competing. Everybody's competing to bring that business, and at the end of the day, it's jobs, right? Bring those jobs to a particular location. So you have to incentivize the person bringing those jobs to come to this, to a location like this. In our particular case, we were competing with the Jersey City market. We were competing with the New York market, the Hoboken market, the whatever market that's more desirable than the Passaic market. So, I mean, we have that's on a local level, but on a federal level, a historical building like this, architecturally, is a gem. To knock it down or to repurpose it to something that doesn't respect the history is, to me, is a loss. Yeah. You know, nationally, we need to preserve our history, preserve what we're proud of. So the HTC program is an incentive for developers like us to say, you know what, take this building that's going to be a challenge. Here's a few extra dollars and get it done. So that is on the historical tax credit side. On the city side, I mean, you mentioned Amazon and all these businesses. When businesses come to locations like this, and I'm not defending I'm not a fan of any side of this, but I believe for developers like us in particular in real estate, these developments are a challenge. I mean, this is a 5-year program, 5-year project for us. Yep. You know, from that first phone call to a CO and to post CO, it's at least 4 or 5 years. You know, you have to do the math on that and make sure it's a viable project. So there is a lot of costs here. A project like this sat vacant for 30 years because it was a challenge. We're competing with the construction prices of New York and trying to deliver that same quality in Passaic, because at the end of the day, we don't want to build something that we're not proud of. So we want to build that New York quality in Passaic. So all of these incentives help us get to a baseline that's manageable. We're not breaking the bank here. We're a smaller developer. We want to do these projects. And without these incentives, we wouldn't be able to do that. And you know, when you look at the new market tax credit program, that's set up for business, for creating jobs.
A commercial enterprise.
It has to be commercial. If you don't do job creation, then you don't qualify. That's an awesome program. I mean, the more job creation we have, the more pride we have with the residents, with the staff person, with whatever.
Sure.
Because once you give a person a job, it helps that family in a multitude of ways. Like I look back at Newark, we've done a number of projects in Newark, and I did a chart the other day because you know we're always talking to a lot of the city folks, and I looked at the job creation we did, and over the past 10 years, we created over 1,000 jobs in all our developments.
This is you and your company through
Me and my
its
company,
development
and
enterprise.
it's through our.
That's impressive. Very impressive.
That's something I'm very proud of. Like to say, and I always complain. I always tell my mom, you know, like this is a tough business.
Yeah.
So every once in a while, I'll get a call from her. She's like, "What's going on?" Whatever, and she'll call me at a bad time. I'll be stressed out. She's like, "What's wrong?" Whatever, and I'm like, "This happened. This happened." I don't give her a lot of details, but I just give. She could hear it in my voice, and then I told her about like the job creation. She's like, "You know something? If anything, if the projects don't go the path you want, at least you're able to create these jobs. Yeah. At least you're able to give back to the community and to make the area a little bit better than when you came there." So these incentive programs at their basis are meant to do that. They're obviously, there are people who take advantage of them, and I understand that and I see that. But at the essence of it, at the end of the day, I think it's a net positive. Hopefully the people taking advantage take less advantage, or we could create structures where it would make the taking advantage a little bit more challenging. But for the most part, I think they're a net positive to the community that they're in.
I want to take a moment to tell listeners about our host, Michael Graves Architecture and Design. This design firm has been serving clients worldwide for 55 years. From their offices in Princeton, New Jersey, New York City, and Washington, D.C., they provide planning, architecture, interior design, and graphic design services for many different building types. Hotels and resorts, office buildings, cultural and educational facilities, housing, healthcare, and civic structures are all part of their repertoire. With hundreds of awards for design excellence, it's clear that they care deeply about their profession and are keen to share ideas widely. So you're the developer for this project, as well as a designer and the construction manager. At the outset and through the course of the project, how did having control of all of those three roles benefit you in the development process?
Well, it goes back to when we started on our first projects. I don't think we had an option. I mean, again, we were competing with the New York market. How do we do all of this and still build these buildings? So having these services in-house was at a necessity. I mean, ideally, nobody wants to do everything, but I think because we did everything, we were able to keep it tight and be able to deliver at a reasonable price tag. Because having all these third parties outside of our business wouldn't have made this thing possible. And especially with rehabs, you're constantly changing. It's funny, whenever we submit a permit set, I know for a fact it doesn't really matter because
Correct.
we end up redesigning the thing. Because once you get in there, you're doing demo, you're removing things that don't belong, and you're redesigning the building as you work on it.
And you mentioned earlier that you had the opportunity to work with your brothers, Thafer and Amer. Could you talk about how you divided responsibilities amongst the various team members at your company?
Sure. So it's a very family-oriented business. Even our office, I mean, we have a small office that, and we try to bring on team members that are passionate about what we do. At the end of the day, if you're just coming for a job, we're not interested. We want you to really believe in what we're doing. And fortunately, we've had some good luck getting the right people on board. Internally, we kind of divide it in a couple ways. I usually take care of the construction and design side of things. My brother Thafer works on the all of the operations, all of the taxes, the insurance, all of the making sure things are paid. He's on more on the accounting side, and Amir works on the property management side. And we all work on business development because we all have to go out there and make sure that we're either finding new deals, or bringing investors, or working with city guys to make sure these projects are viable.
And you mentioned earlier that that a number of your tenants have made commitments to hiring locally. For example, Blink Fitness, their entire staff lives locally here in Passaic. This community-minded approach that we've talked about earlier, how do you see that mindset being a part of your entire business process?
So being a local community developer, and that's in essence what we are, we've always hired locally. I want to say on average over 50% of our workforce and our subcontractors are either Newark or Passaic based. In this particular project, a lot of it was Passaic. What we try to do, we've done this in other projects, we've done projects outside of the Newark area, and typically if we go to a certain city, we'll hire the local architect maybe for entitlements, or we'll hire the local attorney for approval process, and the local, we'll ask and find out who the local contractors are. We'll ask them for their help. So we've learned, being in Newark, having that local, and fortunately for us, Newark has a ton of resources. There's a lot of contractors, very high skilled labor force. we've been fortunate to be able to get a lot of those contractors to work with us. And on average, we're over 50% local and minority workforce for us in Newark.
And in that case, that's something that you are not necessarily required to do. It's something that you're choosing to do as well, right?
We've been doing that since we started. Now it's becoming a requirement for the city of Newark. So if you want to do tax abatements or get any city subsidies, you have to do local and minority participation. And I've always told the councilman or the mayor or whoever we speak to at City Hall, look at our track record. We've been doing this since we started, before you asked us to do it. And I think they really appreciate that.
So you mentioned earlier in terms of the building and how it's operating now, that the eyes on the street, this idea that having activity be visible from the streetscape is an integral part of improving an urban environment. So in this context, Blink Fitness opens at 5 a.m. Mama Sushi sometimes closes at 3 a.m. And there's a constant flow of people through the building. From your perspective, having been there before the project started and now after it's completed and successfully finished, do you see a visible change in the physical environment by having this building be occupied as opposed to being empty?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely motivated the surrounding retailers to upgrade their facades. I know a new building was built across the street. A lot of the streetscape, which you mentioned before, is getting done. The park next door, which they actually named the Joe Buga Park. So they're redoing the park. I think it's going to start in the spring. They're going to redo the whole park. They now have, I've been told, the only one in the world. It's the New Year's piñata dropping. So they dropped the piñata off of this building on New Year's. And last year, even in the rain, it was very successful.
The piñata came down.
The piñata came down, so we're doing it again this year. We're looking forward to it. The mayor has been awesome doing this. He's been a driving force on this project. He sees the importance of the building, and he sees that the activation of this building really helps the main street. So he's invested a lot of time and effort, and even just having, we say jokingly, but the New Year's event is great for the whole area. If he starts building a yearly event around it, it helps the restaurants, it helps the retailers, it brings attention to the city. It might bring in new retailers that never considered Passaic. So all of this stuff really helps. And it all started because they helped support this building and bring it back and make it active again.
So it's this idea of this incremental approach to improvement, building by building.
Correct.
Great. And so now the lights are on, the landmark clock is working again, and this is essentially the beginning of a new era of development for Passaic and the end of your 5-year adventure on this project as a developer, architect, and construction manager. Where do you place this project in the arc of your own personal career and the projects that you've worked on?
So this, compared to like I mentioned before, my 10-year MBA program, this allowed us to take everything we learned and really apply it. In development, you're always making mistakes. The idea is just to make less of them and to stop making the same ones.
Sure.
So this one I thought was good. I would change a couple of things, but for the most part, I'm very happy. We had great people on board. Like we had Jeff Moynihan, Jeff Monhe, who helped us on the financing on this. Okay. We had U.S. Bank. We had New Jersey Community Capital. So our financing team was solid. Our contractors were some of the same contractors we used in Newark, so they knew what we like and we like to build. So we were making less mistakes and doing it much more efficiently. Okay. So the construction on this project, I believe, was a little less than 15 months for a project this size. That's great.
120,000 square feet.
120,000 feet. 15 months. It was awesome. I want to say our construction team and our design team was stellar on this. And now, this, I think, for us as a company, allowed us to show more investors and more banks what we're able to deliver. So now we're, fortunately doing more projects similar size similar challenges, and it builds more confidence for us also. I mean, just for us, my team, myself, it allows us to say, okay, this is a large building. It's over 100,000 feet. I have more confidence now to do one bigger or one more complicated or whatever. So, as much as I sometimes, joke about what I've learned and the mistakes we made, I don't think we're able to be who we are today without all those mistakes. There is no quick way around development. You can't just wake up one day and say, I want to develop. I always tell people development's like you're the ringleader in a circus. It's not something simple. I mean, you have lions on one side, you have trampoline guys, you have clowns, you have cars, and you're the guy in the middle making sure nobody crashes.
Yeah, or the lion doesn't eat the trampoline guy.
Off of the ropes. Lions are not jumping and biting people. There's so many challenges in development. So I think what we've learned in the past is what's making us today. So I'm fortunate to say that we've learned a lot, and now we're trying to implement those. We'll always make mistakes, maybe just less of them, and maybe less expensive ones. Sure. That's all I could wish for.
We have time for a few questions.
I was wondering about when you started out in Newark. There was a time when there wasn't a lot going on in Newark, but there was a lot of potential. Did you have particular role models or mentors or teaming relationships that helped you build all of the knowledge that you have?
I want to say like my favorite mentor was probably Clem Price. Unfortunately, he passed away. And I didn't know him very well, but we met a number of times and we got very friendly near like a couple of years before he passed. And he was the one guy who said, we know how hard this is, just be patient, and there's people who really care about what you're doing. And along with him, and I think maybe the whole landmark committee in Newark, I think it was probably the most comforting in this business, because all these buildings were tough, and they knew, and they've seen the history of Newark. They've seen the obstacles, all of the mishits and all of the challenges and all of the issues that they had. And when we're taking one building at a time and bringing it back to life, they appreciate it the most. Like, they would always be the people that asked for tours after the facts. Less so the business folks. As long as you made them a couple of dollars, it's fine. But this group of people, like you have Liz Del Tufo and Zemin Zhang, and all these people really loved what we were working on. And some people I didn't even know would come out of the blue sometimes like, oh, I love what we did with that building. I'm glad you kept the lobby of this building. I'm glad you restored this. And we saw it, and I knew how difficult it was to bring these things back to life. And it's nice when somebody actually appreciates it. So I want to say in Newark, without them, it would have made the whole process a lot more difficult. Yeah.
So Samer, given your background in architecture, how hands-on and sleeves rolled up are you in the design process? Or do you just say...
No, it's at a point where it's a little too much. I've learned how to deal with it now. Less design, more construction, more business. In the first few projects, we kind of over-designed. And I love them. I mean, the end product was great. I mean, you look at the Hotel Indigo today, I'm very proud of the end results. Unfortunately, sometimes the business model doesn't make sense with the detail. I mean, you have to... And now I see why certain developers, which I hope we never take the shortcut to anything. But I understand sometimes you have to make sure your design makes sense with the end product. If you're over designing something or overbuilding it, it may not be utilized. With the historical buildings, I'm glad that we always try to restore the historical aspects. But sometimes we have to just be realistic with the end product of what will it be used for, and is it a profitable end result? And I'm not saying to just build for the profit. I'm just saying, be more conscious of it. You might not need to do certain things that are not going to change the experience of the building. But we're very hands-on. I mean, I want to say I spend half of my week doing design with the team. Like we have a staff architect who takes care of all the architecture. Brandon's an awesome designer, a great architect, very involved. He's involved with a lot of the AIA committees and with NGIT. We're very plugged into NGIT. We make sure that we try to give back as much as possible. They've been awesome support also. That's another, besides the landmark folks, the NGIT's been an awesome support. It's been good. I mean, but at the end of the day, it does take a lot of our effort to actually deliver these products. Yeah.
So thanks so much for joining us today, Samer.
Thanks for having me.
Next time, I'll be interviewing John Picard, the founder and partner of Picard Chilton, an award-winning design firm based in New Haven, Connecticut, with clients like Uber, ExxonMobil, and Google. My name is Atif Kader, and this has been Conversations with Michael Graves. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.